Whoever you are, we welcome you. Wherever you come from, we welcome you. Whomever you love, we welcome you. Whoever you love, we welcome you.
Good morning, and we do welcome you to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Kent. I'm Randy Bish, your worship leader for today. I'm joined today by Heidi Shaffer Bish, our worship associate. We'll be sharing with you today as we continue in the summer series on the 7 principles of the Unitarian Universalism. We'll be discussing the third principle, acceptance of one another, and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. Reverend Stephen Protzman, the settled minister of the church, is away for a few Sundays, as is Hal Walker, our music director. We join Unitarian Universalists across the country in lighting a chalice today. We light the chalice collectively, celebrating our diversity within our oneness. There is one flame that brightens our paths to remind us that we walk in community. The flame has no preference, but warms the space of all who would draw near. It is a light of community, a light of love, and a light of acceptance. As I have lit our chalice, please join me in lighting your home chalice.
In my youth, I attended the Christian Science Church with my family. I always felt very welcomed on Sundays as a child, and also later as an adult when I did. Church ushers made sure each person was greeted warmly, and my Sunday school teachers lovingly smiled while awaiting my answers to their questions. I dutifully learned the 7 synonyms for God: love, life, truth, soul, mind, spirit, principle. I learned the books of the Bible, the 10 Commandments, the long versions. I learned that Jesus was a great healer who taught that we can heal too. And I learned about Mary Baker Eddy, who wrote the sacred text, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures by Mary Baker Eddy. I also learned that the right answer to just about every question is spiritual. I am spiritual. God is spiritual. You are spiritual. Everything is spiritual. Any deviation from this belief was error, and thus unreal. If our thoughts strayed into negativity, which was decidedly not spiritual, then my thoughts were in error. Of course, as a young child, I thought this meant the air that we breathe. But as I became a teenager, I began to question this all is spiritual, all is good idea when I noted that there was strife in the world and sometimes in my family. Children starved. Some people exercised more power than others, and the environment was polluted. How could this be unreal? How can you change something if you can't acknowledge its existence? My teachers had no satisfactory answers to these questions. I joined the church at age 12, partly to make my dad happy, but decided once I was of age that this path was not for me. Thus began years of strident philosophical materialism, with a focus on the inequalities and injustices of the world, which could be righted if there was a revolution changing power and sharing of material resources, and no need for people to change their hearts or believe in a God. I certainly did not. Years later, actually about 25 years ago, I walked into this church. Prior to this, I had a spiritual awakening. During times of difficulty, I turned to practices of meditation and yoga and was particularly interested in Buddhism, some aspects of Hinduism, New Age philosophy, and also paganism. I'm still working on developing my spiritual path and my own belief systems, and have even integrated some aspects of my childhood faith. I came to this church for acceptance of who I am and who I am becoming without being told what to believe or how to practice. And I found this acceptance from day one. I even found support and inspiration for my own deepening spirituality. That's why I stayed and invited my now husband, Randy, who is leading this worship service, to attend. Come, let us worship together.
Will you join with me now in reciting the words of our covenant? We affirm that each life has brilliance, and when joined with others in joyful community, has the power to transform. We pledge ourselves and our resources to this journey. This covenant inspires and challenges us to dwell together in right relationship. We promise to extend hospitality, nurture community for all ages, encourage spiritual growth, honor diversity, and practice kindness.
Answer Mountain by Sarah Squire. Long ago and far away, or yesterday and just around the corner, or maybe somewhere halfway in between, there was a town that sat quiet and content, tucked into the shadow of a mountain. And carved on the side of that mountain, big and tall so no one could miss them, were the words, "The answer is no." No one knew where the words came from or why they were there. They had just always been there. But oh my goodness, the people who lived in that town, cuddled into that mountain, were glad to have those words there. Because whenever the townspeople had a question, all they had to do was look up at the mountain and read it. The answer was always no. Making decisions was very simple, and life went on smoothly and easily in the town cuddled into the mountain. Until one day. Now, on that particular day, Ma was about to make dinner for the family, and she couldn't decide. Because sometimes it's just really hard to decide. She couldn't decide whether she would make stew or steak or pasta or potatoes or dumplings or donuts. So she went out into the yard. "Should I make dinner or liver for dinner tonight?" she asked the mountain. And the mountain said, "No." All right, I knew that really. Nobody's really crazy about liver anyway. But should I maybe make steak for dinner? And the mountain said, "No." Chicken? No. Should I make tacos or tofu? Beans, broccoli, pork chops, or popcorn? And the mountain said, I think you might have guessed it, no. Ma Custis asked more questions until the sun disappeared behind the mountain, and she kept on asking questions until the sun came up around the other side. And all the mountain ever said was no, because Ma couldn't get an answer that was any kind of an answer. She and her family went hungry. Finally, she just gave up and she made liver anyway. Even though the mountain said no, and even though everyone hated liver, because liver was the first thing she thought of, she made it. But Ma had had enough, and she glared at the mountain, and she stomped her foot, and she shook her fist, and she said, "Why is the answer always no? Why can't you just say yes for once?" And Ma turned around and went back inside. Ma stomped away and went to ring the town bell. She called a meeting, and when that bell rang, the whole town came a-running, from the oldest man with the longest beard to the youngest kiddo who still needed to be carried. No one was going to miss a town meeting, and they came, and they all listened carefully as Ma shared her story. "Seems to me," she said, "that we've got a problem. That mountain just isn't helping us like it should. Seems to me it would be nice if it said yes every once in a while." Now, the townsfolk knew Ma had a point, but they didn't much like this idea. Changing something that had been the same for so long? But after that, they thought for a little bit, and then they thought some more. And finally, they began to nod solemnly. Yes, the mountain would have to be recarved. Mason Stone, the stone carver, nodded along with the rest of them, and he scratched his nose, and he adjusted his cap, and he slowly gazed up the length of the mountain. And he cleared his throat, said in his gravelly voice, "Looks to me like I could do the carving, if that's all right with all of you." And so it was. Mason spent the next 2 weeks up on the side of the mountain, chiseling and chipping and carving away, coming down only when it got too dark to see. And when he was done, the mountain said, "The answer is yes." Mason rang the bell to call the town together, and once they all came running, from the oldest woman with the whitest hair to the youngest kids who still needed carrying, they all wanted to see the new sign, and they all wanted to cheer for the stone carver and all of his hard work. Ma, who had started all of this, came right up to the front of the crowd, and she figured she ought to be the one to ask the first question since she's the one that got it changed. So she stepped right up to the foot of that mountain, and she looked up and she said, "Should I make liver for dinner tonight?" And the mountain said, "The answer is yes." Well, now Ma almost fell over with surprise. "But my family might never forgive me if I serve liver again. All of my kids threatened to hide in the barn for a week. Should I really serve liver?" And the mountain said, "Yes." The townspeople began to grumble. They didn't like the sound of Ma's family grumbling in the loudest. "But, well, I can't," said Ma. "I just can't serve liver again. I promised them that I wouldn't." "Are you telling me that I should break my promise?" And the mountain said, "Yes." The grumbling got louder and louder, and Ma glared at the mountain again and stamped her foot and shook her fist. She turned to the townspeople and said, "Well, you know what? This just isn't right. This can't be right. What are we going to do?" And once again, the townsfolk put on their thinking caps, and everyone thought, Ma, Pa, and all the kids, who probably thought the hardest of all because they were worried about the liver again, very worried. And finally, the smallest of the Custis kids piped up and said, "Why does there have to be one answer? Can't we have more?" And the townspeople gasped. No one had ever thought of such a thing. And they mumbled and they grumbled and they talked amongst themselves. And finally, they decided that the mountain ought to say, "The answer is sometimes yes, and sometimes no, and sometimes wait and see, and sometimes I just don't know." Well, the mason stone carver, who had been listening to all of this talk, cleared his throat, scratched his nose, adjusted his cap, and said, Well, I think I can do it. I don't mind, not really, even if I just finished carving the nude change, but it's gonna take a long time. So how about if I work on it when I can, and we'll hang up some kind of sign on the mountain that lets people know that the answer is coming. And so it was. And the funny thing was that for a little while, Mason worked on that mountain every day. And for a little while, everyone in the town waited eagerly to see the new answer. But soon, the stonemason got tired of climbing that mountain every day, and everyone else got tired of just waiting, and they all started asking each other questions and helping everyone else find the answers that seemed to fit for them. And the townspeople realized that sometimes the same question had more than one answer, and that there were many, many answers that they hadn't even imagined. And all of that was just fine with them. And after a while, they thought that maybe the answer the mountain was giving them right then, just as it was better and more sensible than any other answer it had given. And so they left it as it was. And the mountain said, the answer is under construction. I love this story. I love the story of how the town came together and understanding that the answer can be different for different people and supporting each other through the whole thing. It's a pretty good example of our third principle, I think. I wonder, are there questions that you are certain you have the answer to? And I also wonder, what questions do you have where the answer is still under construction?
Thank you, Colleen. Thank you for allowing us to say no to liver, but to say yes to one another. We now have the opportunity to share together in caring for one another as we share our concerns and ask that we lift up each concern and love and light to those who are mentioned. If you have a concern that you wish to share with the church, please do so by typing your concern in the chat box, and I will read that for all to hear so we can lift up those names and concerns. Raven Luna Black Raven says, continued light for my partner Alyssa during her difficult times. We do indeed send light to her. And Claudia Miller, thinking of a dear friend of my brother, Betty, his turning buddy who died recently following a short illness. Carolyn shares, Mary Mask is unhappily in Anna Care Center. She celebrated her 86th birthday on Friday. Well, happy birthday to her. Vivian Sandlin asks us to remember Jesse Cannon. Shall we now just take a moment of silence, remembering in whatever way you wish to lift these folks that have been mentioned, sending them your love, your light, and your concern. Let's take a moment now. Spirit of life and love, the mystery in which we find strength and common purpose, we turn our hearts and minds toward one another as we hold in this circle of care and concern all who need love and support. Those who have been named here and those in our hearts, for all who are in pain, for all who are ill, for those who are grieving or suffering abuse, may they all find comfort, strength, and peace. Amen. And now we have the opportunity to share our joys as well. Please do so by also sharing your joys in the chat box. Yes, Kathy Kern shares, looking forward to seeing our son Noah this week. Yay. Carolyn shares the socially responsible sweatshop whose big move is happening this afternoon. All the fabric, machines, and everything will be taken from Franklin School to the new home at the Episcopal Church on Manaway Street. Grateful for that opportunity to move into a bigger space. A help space, I hope. Mike Darnell says, I have regained hearing in my left ear. That's wonderful. I know what that's like. Esther shares, my dad's mobility continues to improve after a bout of vertigo. Wonderful news. And Jules shares, I received another raise, which makes me the closest I have ever been to making the same as my male counterparts. It's about time, right? Grateful to my boss to making this happen. We're grateful for the good things that come our way and the blessings that we share in life. We give thanks for the gift of life itself and this journey that we are on the earth. And with a grateful heart and a smile on our faces, we say, Amen.
D.H. Lawrence described our Western culture as being like a great uprooted tree with its roots in the air. He said, we are perishing for lack of fulfillment of our greater needs. We are cut off from the great sources of our inward nourishment and renewal. Tara Brach says, we come alive as we rediscover the truth of our goodness and our natural connectedness to all of life. Our greater needs are met in relating lovingly with each other, relating with full presence to each moment, relating to the beauty and pain that is within and around us. When radical acceptance blossoms in our relationships, it becomes a kind of spiritual reparenting that enables us to trust the goodness and beauty of who we really are. Just as good parenting mirrors back to a child that they are lovable. When we understand and accept others, we affirm their intrinsic worth and belonging. Receiving this kind of radical acceptance can transform our lives.
Hi, Heidi.
Hi, Randy.
I've been looking forward to talking with you about the subject of today. And as you know, the third principle is our topic, as we work our way through the 7 principles of the Unitarian Universalist Church. Principle states acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. I would like to ask it in the form of a question that may help bring it closer to home, specifically for the UU Church of Kent. What is the appropriate UU response toward those who attend services at UU Church of Kent with different spiritual beliefs and spiritual practices? First of all, I think it would be helpful to grapple with the concept of spirituality in order to know how to encourage others in their spirit growth. What is spirituality? What does it mean to be spiritual? We can't answer all of those questions here today, since it is a large topic and people want to eat later, and one for a longer discussion. But let's begin by noting what the principle doesn't say. It doesn't say acceptance of one another and encouraging others in their religious beliefs. Although we always want to encourage others in every situation, in order to understand encouraging others in spiritual growth, we may need to understand the difference between religion and spirituality, because sometimes the lines between the two become blurred. Heidi, in your call to worship, you seem to hint at this. You mentioned what you learned growing up in the Christian Science Church about God, about Jesus, about Mary Baker. But then you said 25 years ago, you had a spiritual awakening and that you are working on your spiritual path. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? It appears that you see a difference between religion and spirituality.
Well, I see a difference between what is externally imposed and what is internally experienced and then integrated. As a youth, I felt I had to conform to a particular theology that belonged to a particular religion. I may not have understood the nuances then that allow people to take different perspectives within the Christian Science faith, which is what I'm up with, but it still seems pretty prescribed to me. Now I'm no longer repelled by the idea of spirituality because I don't associate it with a particular doctrine or dogma that I have to fit in or that I have to believe in to fit in to be accepted. Spirituality to me is an experience of the sacred. In some ways, I have come full circle in my personal theology, as I now believe everything is spiritual. I see myself as part of a sacred whole that itself has a spiritual essence. I think our religion, Unitarian Universalism, is large enough to hold many perspectives on spirituality and how to practice it. There's no one right way regarding spiritual practice, no error in thinking or belief. Therefore, I think our religion is the right fit for me because I want to keep exploring, experiencing, and integrating my sense of the spiritual. And Unitarian Universalism for that. So I suppose I'm spiritual and religious, as I am a U, and it is a religion. Randy, do you see a difference between religion and spirituality? Would you call yourself spiritual or religious or both or neither?
Can I look to the mountain? Well, I've learned that the word spiritual comes from the Greek root word pneuma, which means breath or life force. Spirituality is something that is essentially unseen, but perhaps is hinted at through our spiritual practices such as meditation or yoga, or the certain rituals we may go through, our prayers and so forth. So we can't really see spirituality, but it is a part of life. So I personally think that there is a difference between religion and spirituality, but I also think that we have to be careful how far we go in defining it or describing it, for danger that we limit spirituality to look a certain way according to our definitions, which could then engender expectations that all others will look a certain way. Reverend Rob Hardis of the All Souls Church in Washington, D.C. says this: spiritual growth isn't just about a vertical ascent to a place called heaven, but growth in every dimension at once. It's spirituality 3D. It's not so much a measure of one's God-like characteristics, but rather the spaciousness of one's soul. We need souls that can take the world in all its complexity and diversity and yet still maintain integrity. And we need souls that can love and be in relation with all of that complexity. Instead of fight or flight, we need a spiritual posture of embrace.
So Randy, I asked a question that you didn't seem to have answered. So let me ask it again. Would you call yourself spiritual or religious or both or neither?
So I prefer to say that I'm spiritual but not religious. I see religion as a strict formalization and systemization of beliefs, written or unwritten, expressed or not expressed, that become certain doctrines that become rules and regulations to which you must adhere in order to be a good person, in order to fit in or to be a member. There becomes a list of do's and don'ts that really take the life out of spirituality. So let's take a turn here a moment and talk acceptance. What does it mean to accept others, to encourage their spiritual growth? How do we do that? Do I just walk up to someone and say, hey, I accept you, even though you're different? The opposite of acceptance is rejection. Have you ever been rejected for your spirituality? Or maybe you just felt like you were sticking out like a sore thumb. Heidi, how do you think we accept others to encourage their spiritual growth?
Well, this principle, the third principle, does have two parts: acceptance and encouragement. In our congregation, I feel accepted as myself and as a person on my own spiritual path. But we're not just a collection of individuals. We are supposed to, well, influence each other, interact and share, and sometimes even challenge. I would hope to encourage others on their journeys, as well as inspire my own growth through practicing openness, curiosity, and suspension of judgment as a kind of active or radical acceptance. I think we demonstrate this pretty well in palace groups, where we have deep conversations on spiritual topics. We deeply listen to one another without judgment, and sometimes I feel transformed by those conversations. There are other ways I feel encouraged in my spiritual growth in this congregation, such as having the opportunity to be a worship associate, wrestling with and trying to communicate difficult ideas like spiritual growth. Right now, I see spiritual growth as a kind of deepening in which our insight, values, and behaviors can better align, and we can help one another with that. Service within our community can help create these opportunities for self-awareness and growth, as well as opportunities to practice radical acceptance of one another and ourselves. Randy, have you ever had a period of your life where you saw or experienced rejection, a kind of spiritual rejection?
Well, actually, as you know, Heidi, maybe not everyone knows, but I was a pastor for 25 years. I resigned from my last church in 2002. And as a pastor, I saw what it was like for people to not be accepted. See, our church began to grow and flourish, and we were reaching children and youth and young adults, and many of whom had no previous church experience or were not growing in their spirituality. But there was a core of the inner circle who would not nor could not accept the new people. They were those people, as though they were separate somehow from and different from the common human race. You know, they were Black, they were poor, they wore jeans to church, God forbid, or they simply wanted lively music, more lively than the funeral hymns that we were singing. And sometimes these folks would interrupt me while I was preaching with a comment and want to interact with me. I would engage them a bit. But the rejection of others by the small inner circle became stronger and stronger due to their inflexible attitudes and actions. They weren't doing things according to our tradition. They weren't doing things that way. And this created an atmosphere that said, you're not welcome here, even though those exact words were never spoken. They didn't need to be spoken. It was felt. The excitement and the growth of others were stifled by the stiffness and the religiosity of the inner circle, who majored in the minors and clutched onto their religious rule books of sacred truth. I think we need to acknowledge that others have the right to their beliefs and opinions regarding their spirituality. We can offer differences because there's really no cookie cutter to stamp out exactly the model spiritual person. So I try to stay aware of any creeping judgmental attitudes by watching how I respond. I cannot compare my spirituality with others in any way. Teddy Roosevelt said comparison is a thief of joy. And I would also say comparison is a cause for many divisions in the church and among people. A church, a beloved community, is a place to which you bring your entire real self, all that you are, your questions, your doubts, your beliefs, your spirituality. We are individuals with unique understandings and perspectives, and we need a safe place of acceptance where each one is recognized, appreciated, and accepted for their unique individuality. We build bridges, not walls. We connect hearts, not us. We hold hands, not judgments. We keep space with one another as we share in a common bond of humanity. I really like what Reverend Dana E. Warsnop says, who is a UU minister. Says, often people say they love coming to a place with so many like-minded people. I know what they're getting at, and I know they aren't quite getting it right. I don't want to be with a bunch of people who think just like me. I want to be in a beloved community where I don't have to think like everyone else to be loved or to be eligible for salvation. I want to be with people who value compassion, justice, love, and truth, though they have different thoughts and opinions about all sorts of things. I want to be with independent-minded people of it. I want to be with people who have many names or no name at all for God. I want to be with people who see me with goodness and dignity, who also see my failings and foibles and who still love me. I want to be with people who feel their interconnection with all existence and let it guide their footsteps on the earth. I want to be with people who see life as a paradox and don't feel like they always have to rush in to resolve it. I want to be with people who are willing to walk the tightrope that is life and hold my hand as I walk mine. I want to be with people who let church call them into a different way of being in the world. I want to be with people who support, encourage, and even challenge each other to higher and more ethical living. I want to be with people who inspire one another to follow the call of the Spirit. I want to be with people who covenant to be honest, engaged, and kind, strive to keep their promises, and hold me to the promises that I make. I want to be with people who give of themselves, who share their hearts and minds and gifts. I want to be with people who know that human community is often warm and generous, sometimes challenging, and almost always a grand adventure. So we move into the time for giving. We remain a strong and thriving community through the generosity of each one of you in giving money, time, and your talent to the church. We also give to other agencies and organizations in Kent and beyond that serve those in need. And this month, we give to the local chapter of the National Alliance of Mental Illness of Portage County, or NAMI. They attempt to improve the lives of people with mental illnesses and their families. You will see on the screen soon how you can give today through your cell phone or by visiting the church's website, or the old-fashioned way, write out a check and send it in. Now, as the song plays during the offering, it may be a bit faint, so you may need to adjust your volume to hear it well. But we're going to hear a song by a group called The Breathing Room, entitled Let the Way of the Heart. Let your heart guide you as you give. As we extinguish the chalice, would you say these words with me? We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community or the fire of commitment. May we carry these in our hearts and minds until we are together again.
Just as you are without changing a thing. Just as you are, I accept you. I see you, I hear you, I welcome you in just as you are. Just as you are. Just as you are without changing a thing. Just as you are, I accept you. I see you, I hear you, I welcome you in just as you are. Just as you are. Just as you are without changing a thing. Just as you are, I accept you. I see you, I hear you, I welcome you in just as you are. Just as you are.
And so, may the words of our mouths and the meditations of our hearts that we shared today lead us to be open-hearted, accepting of others, loving and kind toward all, and growing in spirit. Amen. May it be so. Namaste.